going to be a tough road.
Absolutely. We can get into the mulligans here and see what these guys are playing. Again, looks fairly standard from Dog. We see the Tinker Sharp Sword Oil, Antique Heal Bot, which probably won't be a huge factor in this battle, though it could help him to kind of stay with the Paladin. Paladin does have a lot of staying power. He does often run a lot of healing as well. We see just full mulligan there from Ek0p. Lots of his top-end cards, not really what he needs. That's a bit more like it. Does have the double Sen'jin Shieldmaster. And those golden Sen'jins are quite pretty there from Ek0p, certainly.
Yeah, and these two guys, if competitive Hearthstone had superlatives, like voting superlatives like you did in high school, then these two players would be voted most likely to be cast as supervillains in movies. They both look like they could be supervillains, especially when their camera gets blacked out when it's not their turn.
What I really like here is that it appears that Ek0p may have an all-golden deck and with no golden hero, and Dog has a golden hero with no golden cards.
Yeah.
Does that tell us something about the psychology of the players?
Well, if you're really trying to min-max, unless you have all golden cards in your deck, then you don't want to play any golden cards. Because it makes your opponent, it gives your opponent a slight advantage sometimes, because they know that like if you play a golden card in one game and then a non-golden card in the next game, they know you have 2 copies of that card, which usually isn't going to be that big of a deal. But if you're really trying to min-max and try and gain as much of advantage as possible, then that's the way to go. So unless Ek0p does not have an all-golden deck, his Quartermaster is not golden. So I don't know. He's a tryhard, but he's not enough of a tryhard.
It's yeah, you do always have to try hard, but we do see from Ek0p, looks like the Quartermaster not golden. And that's so you got to call that a misplay there, really. Not having the full golden preparation. Deck. Now
really
we saw the Knife Juggler come out there from Ek0p really early, and I get the idea of playing something early, but against a rogue, there are just so many ways that you can kill that early Knife Juggler. That often feels like a really difficult decision, and it's not something I guess Ek0p would have wanted to do, kind of sacrificing the Knife Juggler like that. But it can be a good bit of tempo for Dog, but that Sen'jin coming down, and actually there's not a huge amount of good stuff in his hand here.
Yeah, backstab Deadly Poison is a way to deal with it, and I think that might be the only clean way to do it. Even though you're sort of giving up a lot of your turn, you're not using your mana that efficiently. It sets you up to where you can clear quite a big board the next turn with Blade Flurry. Yeah, that's the only play. And this is an interesting deck from Ek0p. Sen'jin Shieldmaster is a card that a lot of Paladin players will say is a card that you can substitute in depending on the meta. But it's really a card that's not played very much nowadays because Sludge Belcher is really strong. It comes out a turn later. It's so much stickier than a Sen'jin Shieldmaster. And a lot of Paladins will opt to play like a Paladin Shredder instead, just because it's a lot tougher to remove.
Yeah, we do see the... yeah, he's going to have to use the Deadly Poison's dagger here. Swing, kind of a waste of that there with the Eviscerate. We did need to use the Deadly Poison to activate the Eviscerate. It's not the most efficient trade. And you see the next Sen'jin come out there. That's going to feel pretty bad if you're Dog. You probably... I mean, you do have the second Eviscerate, but I guess you can backstab Eviscerate here, but you might actually just opt to... Yeah, he's just going to opt to coin Sprint. They can use the backstab and the dagger to clear this Sen'jin. That's definitely not a bad spot for playing that Sprint. Would have wanted to prep it, but coining it out on turn 6 is... That's not too bad either. And doesn't go ahead and kill the Sen'jin in the end.
No, you definitely have a lot of wiggle room here as the rogue player against the Paladin, because Paladins they ramp up over a certain amount of time. They have a couple of strong play turns like Muster for Battle Quartermaster, but if you take a turn to sprint or if you take a turn to draw cards, you're not going to be in too much trouble, just because they're not going to have crazy turns where they just burst you down from a super high amount. You have a little bit of time to work with. And so he can take the time to sprint there, make sure that he gets a big hand, because he knows that there's nothing a Paladin can do that's going to like lock him out from being able to like clear whatever board that he has. Maybe with the exception of Lotheb. but that would be really the only card that would punish him for not really building a board during his turn.
Yeah, and Ek0p's going to get the Quartermaster down here. With double muster in hand, that feels... Again, that doesn't feel like maybe the play he would have wanted to make, because it does mean that that's one potential muster Quartermaster down, particularly sitting on turn 7. I mean, that would have been a great play on turn 8. But like you said, giving the Rogue time, which is the Paladin just doesn't have much burst, it doesn't have a huge amount of threat that just hits the board really quickly. It gives the Rogue a lot of time to maneuver, and that's really what you don't want to give these Rogue decks, is time to maneuver and set up things like a massive Blade Flurry. And you can see here, this is just going to completely clear Ek0p's board.
Yeah, I like that play. It might seem wasteful to use the Deadly Poison as just a way to make your Blade Flurry stronger, but he would have either had to use the Backstab or the Deadly Poison. And later in the game, both of those tools, they sort of deal 2 damage themselves. Deadly Poison, you can say that it does 4, but immediately. And Backstab's actually easier to combo with. It can make for a lot stronger turns later in the game where you want to make a really strong turn but don't have as much mana to work with. So I like their opting to go with the Deadly Poison, even though it might seem a little wasteful, as opposed to going with just the Backstab and leaving part of the Quartermaster alive. He wants to protect that Violet Teacher as much as he can.
Yeah, it's difficult to make these calls, as you say, particularly with the Rogue, and just having very specific resources that you want to be using at very specific times. But Emperor Thaurissan looks like it's going to come down here from Dog, and in Rogue, this card can just be absolutely killer in reducing the mana cost of these cards.
In every deck can be absolutely
This is true.
killer. Even if you're just
Rogue.
Even if you just have 3 cards in your hand and you're just reducing the cost of 3 cards, that's basically stronger than an Innervate, even if it dies the next turn, because you're opening up more mana than your next turn than an Innervate would have. So the value of that card is just ridiculous. Of course, you can only have 1, unlike Innervate where you can have 2. It's still just anything above 3 or 4 cards in your hand is just absurd amounts of value, especially in Rogue, because later in the game it'll allow him to make the most disgusting turns ever, which... Oh man, it's crazy what you can do with Emperor Thaurissan in a big hand.
Yeah, I mean, this feels pretty good for Dog right now, obviously getting that body on the board. Eldar Peacekeeper, Equality, a couple of tools that Ek0p has to deal with it. I guess he can decide he's... Yeah, probably just going to go ahead and use the Equality. Eldar Peacekeeper would reduce its potency and attack, but that's not the real threat of the Thaurissan. So the Equality, this is a pretty good board for Equality, and he might even... He's going to go for a muster for battle here, I think, probably, with the Knife Juggler and try and kill it with a Juggle. It's always... we talked about style points earlier. Killing things with the Knife Juggler, always good.
Yeah, and a lot of times you want to wait till there's a little bit bigger of a board. Or before you use second muster, make sure that you... Yeah, I don't think he's going to use the second muster here. But he might. To be honest, I wouldn't, because I'd want to wait. If he's running a second Quartermaster, I would try and wait, because this would play like directly into a Fan of Knives play, which he used Sprint earlier. So it's actually pretty likely that he'd have it. So, yeah, not surprised that he decides to go with Eldar Peacekeeper here. He's going to hope for the Juggle on the... Nope. He only has to take 1 damage, but...
Yeah, I guess that's okay, but it's... Yeah, not being able to juggle into
If he doesn't draw the AoE here, he might be in some trouble.
Well, there's the Blade Flurry, like you said, and the Spell Power as well. Not to sound too much like Gara, but the Spell Power...
Yeah.
And we've had the Backstab as well, means you can clear this entire board. SI7 is an option. Again, you look at all the options in Dog's hand here. He just has so many ways to clear this board. He's going to go with the Backstab, and he might not even Blade Flurry here. Might just... Yeah, it looks like he's just going to kill off the 2 bigger minions. Mm-hmm. And I guess that is a risk if Quartermaster could come down, if Ek0p were to top deck a Quartermaster. But again, he does have options with Blade Flurry and the Spell Power that could shut that down. And there is the Dragon Consort. Well,
yeah,
we talked about it.
Even if you're just running Dragon Consorts, I still think it's a strong card. Or even if you're just running Dragon Consorts and, say, 1 Azure Drake, or Dragon Consorts and Ysera, it just makes for such huge power plays, because you can bring Ysera out on, what, turn 6? Is it 2 less or 3 less?
It's 2 less.
2 less. Okay, turn 7. or turn 6 with the coin. Or next turn, you can play a 3-mana another Dragon Consort, or a 3-mana Azure Drake. And you could have a 3-mana Azure Drake on turn 7, then a 4-mana 3-damage Consecrate, which is pretty absurd. So the combination they can be with that, even without many dragons, right on time.
That Fan of Knives top deck, that is insane. Fan of Knives into an Eviscerate. It doesn't even need the Eviscerate, could just use one of his 3/3s, but it's, you were going to see the Lotheb, and then I think, yeah, we're going to see the Dagger. I think we're going to see the Eviscerate here to clear this up. Yep, so he's going to use the Eviscerate to clear up the Dragon Consort, go all the way into face, and this is starting to get actually quite out of hand for Dog here. Such a great board, and just drew into those perfect options. Yeah. There's a Belcher that's going to slow things down a little bit, but I'm not sure that's going to be enough because the sap is in hand. And there you go, there's the concede from Ek0p. So Dog was up 1-0. I think that game may have been longer than our whole entire last series there, EJ.
Yeah, that seriously, face hunter all 3 games in this game, but these games are a little bit more exciting. Dog in that last turn was actually 1 damage off lethal with the Fan of Knives. He may not have thought about it, but he was actually really close with the South Sea Deckhand Blade Flurry. He actually had 18 damage, I believe. But it looked like I didn't even look at it. It was pretty much a 1 game anyway, so that's gonna be a quick start. I mean, that's just how that matchup usually goes, unless the rogue just doesn't draw into any AoE, which is really unlikely because sprint makes them get through their deck so quickly. I mean, Dog was already through more than half of his deck, so him just drawing Blade... He even had Blade Flurry. He didn't really even need the Fan of Knives there. It was just sort of the icing on the cake there. But usually they draw into their AoE timely enough to where they can deal with Muster for battle. Paladin has a really hard time building up a board that's immune. You sort of have to get really huge tempo swings early game, rely on the rogue not having AoE, and then have a big Lotheb turn to shut them down, and win basically the next turn. That's how you win as a Paladin in that matchup. So it's really tough. Dog fortunate to match up against that in the first. But we'll see. This is another rough matchup for Ek0p. Hunter, this is probably a face Hunter. And so,
no, it's the Mage for Dog, sorry. No, I'm sorry, the icon on our screen appears to be wrong there. But yeah, it's going to be the Paladin of Ek0p against the Mage of Dog.
Okay.
And as you said before, Mage is a very, very versatile archetype. Who knows what the Mage could be? You predicted Freeze Mage. I think that's probably a safe bet. Mech Mage is also very strong, but who knows what we'll see from this Mage. And Paladin, Ek0p, I guess, you know, we talked about the strategy of Conquest already so much, but Paladin is possibly one of the more difficult decks in his lineup to get the win with, so he needs to get that win as quickly as possible if he's going to win the series. Things didn't go too badly, just ran into a bad matchup with that rogue, and he's going to be hoping for better things against the Mage.
Yeah. Paladin, Freeze Mage is really strong currently because Emperor Thorsan makes for plays that weren't possible before. Especially, there's a couple different variations of Freeze Mage now that can be viable. Emperor Thorsan plus Malygos in Freeze Mage is actually super strong because you can Emperor Thorsan if you have Malygos, Frostbolts, and Icelance in your hand. And it makes it so you can Malygos, Frostbolt, Icelance in the same turn, which is absurd amounts of damage. That's 16 plus. It's over 30 damage. You can't even count. Yeah, it's almost damage. I think it's a ridiculous amount of damage. I think it's like 32 damage, which is absurd. And I mean, that combo may not be that likely, but even if you just have 2 Frostbolts and Icelance, or a Frostbolt and 2 Icelances, with Malygos, if you can play Malygos on the same turn and do that, just absolutely ridiculous amounts of burst that wasn't possible before in Freeze Mage. The Malygos version may not be as popular, but Freeze Mage in general, just with that card, has just increased in strength. Paladin, one of the decks that can deal with it pretty well, just because usually they run quite a bit of heal. An anti-heal bot and a lay on hands is not a strange thing to see in Paladin. Lotheb is a staple in Paladin decks. They can make big turns with pressure early on. If they can muster for battle Quartermaster, they can put on a lot of pressure before the mage can deal with it. So, oh, there's a Nixia. So that's one of the dragons that Ek0p's running, apparently.
Wow, that's we didn't see that in the last matchup, but this is very definitely a Dragon Paladin with some interesting options. But it's going to be a Freeze Mage for Dog. We see the dibs there, the Hoarders that kind of betraying that a little bit. But drawing to some better early game here from Ek0p, the Shielded Mini-Bot, that's going to be doing probably a lot of work for him against these early minions from Dog. But the board is very, very unimportant for in this matchup against Freeze Mage. Freeze Mage probably one of the more technical decks that we're seeing in most tournament play. It's a very, very different style of deck. TJ, give us a little overview of how Freeze Mage works, what Freeze Mage is looking to do, and what we're going to see in this matchup here.
In most matchups, the biggest thing Freeze Mage wants to do is just draw through as much of their deck as possible. Freeze Mage is not really playing against you, they're playing against themselves. You have to make sure that you fit your curve on every single turn. You have to make sure that you draw as many cards as possible while not overdrawing, because all of your cards are crucial. And then your win condition is basically Alexstrasza into Burst. And as long as you can get to an Alexstrasza turn safely with Burst in your hand before your opponent can get you low enough to pop your Ice Block, you pretty much win the game. And against some decks, it can feel like an uphill battle against Freeze Mage. Sometimes it can even feel unwinnable, because you're not really, when you're playing against a Freeze Mage, you're not really playing against something. You're sort of just throwing your cards out there, they get frozen. You throw more cards out there, they get frozen. He throws Doomsayer. The counterplay is pretty low, but there are some things that you can do, like saving your heals, having timely low thebs, saving certain key cards like Owl for Doomsayers if you know that you're going to build up a board. There's things you can do to increase the matchup, but a lot of it comes down to whether or not the Freeze Mage is drawing and playing on point. So it can be frustrating at times, but it's like you said, it's a really technical deck to watch.
Yeah, well, we see a lot of the key components of Freeze already has Dog. There's the Pyroblast, the Alexstrasza, those are two big finishes for turn 9 and 10. The Ferguson is going to come down, and that's actually going to change this matchup quite considerably. Just from the effect on the Alexstrasza and the Pyroblast, that's going to make a big difference to the win condition of this deck.
Yeah, throwing out the Doomsayer on this turn, I mean, he wants to reduce the pressure, but Ek0p has to be a little bit happy about that, just because he knows that he's going to have a lot bigger pressure tools coming in the next couple turns that are going to put even more pressure. Equality is a good draw because he has to be able to deal with this Thorstein, because against Freeze Mage, you can't really afford to leave Thorstein out for more than one turn, because that means it makes for some huge plays that they can make later on. Fireball costing 3, even Pyroblast costing 9 could make it so that you can Pyroblast, and if you had a Frostbolt in your hand, you could Frostbolt and Ice Lance in the same turn. With Thorstein, it just opens up so many combos that are just absolutely ridiculous. If he left it alive for another turn, he could Pyroblast and Ice Block in the same turn, which is absurd. That was like one of the main things that were gating mages from being able to take victory sometimes. Usually they're off by one turn. They want to put out Burst and Ice Block at the same turn so they don't die, but they can't. So that card is just ridiculous in Freeze Mage.
Yeah, we're going to see Onyxia here, which I guess that's a pretty good target for Flame Strike. This board full of whelps, but I don't think... I'm just going to see the Alexstrasza come down here, perhaps.
Mm-hmm. He's calculating his damage here. He's thinking, can I burst him down over the next couple turns and still be able to take the brunt of this damage? And the answer is most likely yes, because he does actually have 15 damage in his hand. He probably won't account for the heal bot, but it's not really that risky of a play. He even has Frostbolt, Ice Lance. This is looking really grim for Ek0p. He's got to draw into like more points of heal plus second Lotheb, because Alexstrasza's already been out, which an early Alexstrasza usually spells bad things.
Yeah, but he's going to go for Consecrate here and use his Slaughter minions to trade rather than the 8/8, which is, I guess that's pretty good, keeping the larger body alive on his board. It's going to give him more damage potential. Healbot's going to come down. That's going to mess up what Dog was trying to do a little bit. He's able to pop this as well. No, there's no Ice Block right now.
Yeah, he's still at 23 health, or 25 health, sorry. So this turn he can Pyroblast and play Doomsayer. Oh no, sorry, he's on 9 mana. Yeah, Pyroblast this turn. Next turn he has Fireball, Frostbolt, Ice Lance, which is 13 damage plus a ping, so 14. So unless he has points of heal, yeah, he's dead this turn. So that's game already on turn 10. That's like almost the ideal curve that you can have as a Freeze Mage, being able to bring out Emperor Thorsan, reduce the cost of cards like your Alexstrasza and your Pyroblast, and just being able to kill them on curve, which is absurd.
Yeah, as much damage on the board as possible here, but it's not going to be enough. And you see, even with the Ice Block coming into hand, which is usually really bad for Freeze Mage to be able to not be able to get those off match scientists, this is actually going to here. Doesn't even need to have one of his Ice Blocks off. As you said, perfect exactly for the Freeze Mage, and exactly what the Freeze Mage needed to do. That's the 2-0.
Yeah, and I mean, he even had lots of damage in his hand to follow up from that. Even if he had Lay on Hands, he could have, at that turn, he had the reduced cost Ice Block. He could have Ice Blocked, Frostbolt, Ice Lance, Ping. The next turn he could have double Fireballed. There was just so many things that he could have done, and that's just how poor that matchup can sometimes be if the Freeze Mage draws well. Like I said, it sometimes it doesn't even feel like you're playing against something. Like the Freeze Mage is just sort of playing against themselves. They're playing against their own hand, which is really rough. Yeah,
you see matches all the time where it looks like the Freeze Mage is dying, and then the Ice Block comes at the perfect time, and everything is fine. It's going to be the deck of Dog is the final deck that he needs to get a win with. And we see Dog doing very well here. Same kind of strong performance he's had in the KPL, which you can watch obviously every Tuesday and Wednesday from 6:30 Central European time. We're halfway through that now. We're going to have the playoffs at the start of next month for £15,000. So the big league in Hearthstone ever. So make sure you're watching that as well. And in fact, this is going to be a Warlock mirror match. That's very interesting. And the archetypes are going to be all important here.
Yeah, definitely. Just because there's like sort of a rock, paper, scissors that goes on with Warlock decks. And actually with Imp Gang Boss, I'm not actually sure how it works out. But Zoo usually struggles against Handlock if they can draw into some of their key cards. Warlocks, they do have more tools now. Most Warlocks are teching in either one power overwhelming or double power overwhelming. So later in the game, Zoolocks can get through big walls. But if they put the Handlock low enough to where you can play Molten Giants and build up a wall, sometimes that can just be the end of Zoolock. It's actually a really skillful matchup because what the Zoolock wants to I guess what we
you can stop talking about Handlock because we can see pretty much identical Zoo starts here for both Ek0p and Dog, both getting Argus and Implosion, but mulliganing it away. Both managing to get 1-drops as well, which is pretty crucial.
Yeah, the 1-drop for Ek0p being a little bit better. Flame Imp is one of the ideal starts, and Imp Gang Boss is actually a huge card in this matchup, just because you want to put as many annoying things on the board as possible. You want as much power on the board as possible every single turn. Because usually the player that gets board control first, that gets overwhelming board control first in Zoo versus Zoo, it's going to be the player that wins, because Zoo doesn't have a lot of comeback mechanics. Once they lose the board, it's really hard for them to gain it back, because usually, I mean, sometimes they do. Some Zoo players do run a copy of Shadow Flame to make, it's more like the mid-range Zoos that run that, to make like a power overwhelming Shadow Flame turn to come back, but Implosion is usually their only damage from hand spell that they can use to try and make it come back in the game, and a lot of times that's not enough in the mirror matchup. And we can see here the curve for both players, not the best. This turn, having to tap on turn 2 in a Zoo mirror matchup usually isn't the best of options. He does have 2 Imp Gang bosses plus the Defender of Argus, which are all fantastic cards. Getting that egg down and being able to have an activator for that egg, like the Defender of Argus, is also another big swing play in the matchup.
Absolutely, there's so much going on here. The Sea Giant, obviously in hand for Dog. Well, that could be absolutely like a killer in this matchup if the board gets flooded on either side, in fact, or both sides. Just doubling Gang Boss for Ek0p, that new card, which is really making Zoo a potent threat again.
Yeah. And you see here, I mean, how do you deal with it? You can power overwhelming, but you're still going to be using that power overwhelming, which could be used as burn, and you're still giving him a 1/1 imp. But you have to be able to deal with this immediately, or else it can get out of control. Because let's say he didn't have power overwhelming here, and he was forced to play like Echoing Ooze, and those 1 health creatures that the imp gang boss can just throw into, it's losing 1 health, but then it's spawning an imp. So it's basically gaining power for killing one of your creatures, which is pretty ridiculous amounts of value if you really think about it on the surface. And there's the Void Caller. Void Caller, pretty standard now. Even if you don't have many demons, Void Caller is still a strong bind in itself. And no matter what kind of imp it summons, it's still going to give you more mana efficiency at the end of the day. And if it does bring out a Doomguard, that's like ideal scenario. And it just gives you a huge boost to your board strength.
Yeah, I mean, even if it's summons something like a Flame Imp, that can be really crucial in this matchup where your health's going away that free health, and can really increase the values of those Flame Imps later on in the game.
Yeah. Alright, so this turn's a little bit tougher. He doesn't have a clean way to deal with this Void Caller, but at the same time, I don't know if he necessarily wants to deal with the Void Caller yet. He doesn't know what's going to come out the other side. Sort of like Pandora's box. That there's that moment of panic when you kill a Void Caller and you don't have a way to deal with something big that comes out of it. And sometimes it just comes back empty. Sometimes he's drawing blanks, but sometimes there's a Doomguard on the end of that and you just lose the game from it. So it's a really tough thing to deal with.
Yeah, he was thinking about the Defender of Argus on these 2 oozes, but he's going to go ahead and just use the Abusive Sergeant and the Gang Boss to fill up the board, get a bit of pressure in. He's running out of time a little bit, roping against here, but going to get it all in, I think.
You're probably thinking, well, it's Zoo, why is he roping? Zoo vs. Zoo is actually a really tough matchup to play, because every single point of damage matters. When you're both playing the exact same decks, and you both have very similar starts, if one player makes a slight misplay, it opens up opportunities for the other player to really capitalize on it. And that's a lot of times what happens in mirror matchups is one player makes one suboptimal play and that completely changes the course of the game. So not surprised that he's taking his time on his...
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Mirror matches are kind of, I guess, the seal or the RNG matches, whichever way you want to look at it.
Yeah, that's true as well. When mirror matchups increases the effect of randomness just a little bit more, because one player could get stuck with 2 Doomguards and a power overwhelming as their opening hand, and the other guy curves out like with Flame Imp, Haunted Creeper, Imp Gang Boss. So, but this game they both had pretty similar starts. This would be a very valuable Sea Giant.
Yeah, 1 mana Sea Giant. That's a pretty good value. He's trying to, yeah, I guess he's going to pop that and see what comes out of the hand.
Ooh, that might have been a misplay. Yeah,
that was definitely a misplay. Yep, look at his face. We can measure for sure.
Your own minion dies as well when you trade, so it's going to cost 2 less, not 1 less.
Oh.
Dog, obviously shaken up about that. See, those are the things. I mean, imagine the strength of his board right now if he had an extra Sea Giant. Like, Ek0p is already at 17 health. If all that Sea Giant has to do is swing twice. And this turn, he had nothing. He had 2 eggs. If he had a Sea Giant on board, that would basically be game over. And now it's going to be really rough.
Well, he does have the double power overwhelming, which is a pretty good trade with the Sea Giant, and would definitely give him some options. But yeah. That was a definite misplay from Dogs, a very uncharacteristic misplay. We talked about how good a player he is. We've seen him go very long in his turns, be thinking about his turns an awful lot. And he's now going to play the Sea Giant, but I'm pretty sure we're just going to see double power overwhelming here on probably these eggs, and then a huge Void Terror as well. That could be a pretty good swing turn.
Yeah. An early Void Terror is really something that's tough to deal with in Zoo, but Sylvanas being played in this more mid-rangey Zoo is a little bit interesting. It's kind of a slow card, especially with this deck, because if you get caught with like a slow hand early on, like a clunky hand early on, it can sometimes mean that you just lose the game from there. Because, again, like I said, you don't have comeback mechanics. And his hand is actually pretty poor. He does have the power overwhelmings to activate these eggs. He does have the Void Terror to activate the eggs, but as far as big creatures go, it's not the strongest. He will be able to clear up the Sea Giant here, which is really... But it's...
Yeah, so we're going to see the double power overwhelming. Actually, just going to see it on one. That's not a huge difference. Okay.
Wow. That's actually a huge, huge turn, because he puts an 11-7 on the board, plus two of those Nerubians from the eggs.
I think the thing that was giving him pause there was the Sylvanas, because the Sylvanas versus plus power overwhelming is a huge turn.
Yeah, he could have stolen the Sea Giant.
Yeah, Ek0p's a big fan of Sylvanas as a card, so I know he was thinking long and hard about how he was going to play that. But this was definitely too strong a board, I think, to turn down. Double Doomguard for Dog now in hand, but this is a really difficult position to win from.
Yeah. Even if he had, to be honest, looking at it like you said, even if he did play that Sea Giant on the one turn where he made that mistake, he probably still would have been in just about the same position that he is now, because he did have the double power overwhelming. So getting out that big Void Terror, his hand is so clogged too with the double Doom Guards and no Void Caller to bring him out for free. He's most likely going to have to discard one of those Doom Guards in order to play the other one safely, or for any use. And Dr. Boom comes out as well. This is one of the biggest boards that you'll see from a zoo.
Yeah, I think he's going to go with the Nightcrawler Sylvanas instead. Save the Dr. Boom. Doesn't even need Dr. Boom. Just I'm Sylvanas, and this is very, very Ek0p. Dog can see where they're going, I think.
Yeah. And he's gonna swing for 11 with this Void Terror, with a Sylvanas on the board. Now he's thinking, is there any way that I could lose the next turn? And there actually is. If he... Actually, no. With 8 mana, there's not, because he can't tap. Well, there is for 3 cards. He could Doomguard, not discard the 2 power overwhelmings, and kill him. But that's very, very unlikely, because he'd have to have exactly those cards. Oh, wow. She decides to take the damage. And see, this is one of those situations where even if he gets rid of his Argon Squire and his Haunted Creeper to try and reduce the amount of cards that he's actually discarding, he's still going to discard the second Doomguard in that situation. And even just playing a Doomguard on the board is really not going to do much of anything. Because, yeah, he's still dead next turn regardless. He could try and stop some of the damage while he can, but he needs to not discard his other Doomguard in order to have any sort of chance of winning. So I think the best play here is actually to just either tap and play a Doomguard and hope that your second Doomguard doesn't get discarded. So how much damage is staring at him on the board? That's 18, 19, 23, 28. I don't think he can even take enough damage off the board to even survive next turn with what he has in his hand.
Well, you can take the Void Terror off with 1 Doomguard.
Yeah, that's true.
He's going to sack the other Doomguard.
Yeah, but then he's not going to have enough damage to win in this scenario, because I don't think there's a way that he's going to be able to do a 11 from hand. Let's see.
That's 19 for Ek0p.
Yeah, it's not quite there. And he's thinking, what's the only way that I can lose in this scenario? Is if he doesn't clear. But it's actually pretty tough for him to clear. Because the only way for Dog to win is if he draws into Power Overwhelming, taps, and gets a second Power Overwhelming. So they have to be his next 2 cards.
Yeah, he's going to offer the favorable juggles here.
And even then, I don't think it's possible. Oh, it is possible, but it's just very unlikely.
Oh, he could have got some good juggles there. Can't play the Dire Wolf, of course, because
nope.
There's never been that in Implosion.
That's not gonna really help him. Implosion Face won't even do it, even if you
Of
could.
course. Yeah. So Ek0p going to take in that Zoomer match, and as you said, those Zoo mirrors can be very, very interesting in Ek0p, but with those mid-range threats, the Sylvanas, the Void Terror, the Alter Boom, Ek0p was really able to take over into the mid-game there, and that's really what meant that he was able to seal that out.
Yeah, and again, the misplay didn't really matter in the end. The misplay with the Sea Giant turn, because regardless, Ek0p already had those double power overwhelmings in his hand, so he would have been able to take it out and be able to activate one of the eggs. So, just rough stuff. But again, that's one of the benefits of going up 2-0 in the series in Conquest. You play the same deck 3 times, and you just have to take one win. And this Zoo deck doesn't really have too many really poor matchups. It's got poor matchup against Face Hunter. It can struggle against Freeze Mage as well. But as far as like really poor matchups where it just gets absolutely destroyed, there isn't many decks that can do it. So he's saving that deck for last as sort of his ace. It's actually a pretty good strategy because he knows that if he does get wins with his first 2 decks, even if he just has 2 opportunities with that Zoo deck to get a win, he'll most likely be able to do it. And
Yeah.
I like that strategy that Doc went in with his lineup choices, with the order that he played his decks.
Well, Ek0p's going to be switching back to the Paladin here. Obviously, we know Dog has to stick with that Warlock deck to win. But Ek0p going back to the Paladin, we're not going to see his Mage deck yet. Maybe we'll see that if he gets a win with the Paladin here. But Paladin versus Zoo, that can be an interesting matchup. Depends how the Paladin draws, obviously. But if he can get that strong mid-game again with things like Dragon Consort, he can really, really impact the mid-game.
Yeah, and I think this matchup is actually really tough for Paladins. It's so hard for them to deal with the board because every turn that a Paladin usually has a swing play, the Warlock has a stronger play. So the Warlock needs to draw poorly, and the Paladin basically needs to draw into their really valuable early drops like Zombie Chow and Shielded Minibot in order to have much of a chance. By the time a turn where they can Equality and Consecrate comes around, they're usually already too far behind for them to be able to pull themselves back into the game. And now with cards like Imp Gang Boss coming out on turn 3, usually Consecrate plays by themselves aren't very strong against Paladin anymore, or against Warlock as a Paladin anymore. So having to just hero power on that turn is pretty rough because he's... Oh, there's a Zombie Chow, so that's something at least.
Yeah, it's not bad being able to Zombie Chow and hero power on turn 3, but it's definitely not great. He's going to survive to turn 4 and have that Senjin. That's definitely going to help him. Going first is really, really crucial here. If Ek0p was going second, he would definitely be a lot further behind. But
Yeah. We'll see what he rolls on this implosion.
Oh, perfect. Killing it. Killing the 1-1 with the juggles as well. That's this is a pretty early lead for Dog here. You can see Ek0p already thinking this matchup is not going entirely to plan.
Yeah, see, this is just one of the reasons why this matchup is just so hard for Paladin. Because like I said, there's just so many power plays that Warlocks can make. And it's not like they only have one. It's not like Knife Juggler Implosion is their only power play. If he was able to hide an Imp Gang Boss behind like that Voidwalker, and then be able to Implosion, something like that, where he has to like force out a Consecrate to clear, but the Consecrate also summons Imps from the Imp Gang Boss. A situation like that where against most classes you'd be able to Truce Over and be able to make a big swing play, be able to clear off a powerful minion, just isn't possible because the Void Caller came out early on. So he's already at such low health. He's going to try and Dragon Consort, but I mean, what's he going to be? The effect that he's going to have with that dragon is not going to be that great.
How much damage he's turning down? It's doing a 9, 4, 13. Dog is not far away from being able to kill Ek0p here. And Truth Over, as you said, is just absolutely useless here. It's going to just take out this Voidwalker. That's not what you want to use it for. This is a really tough spot.
If he gets perfect juggles, I think he can actually do 16 damage this turn on face. Of course, it looks like he's going to Implosion here because he's clearing off to make room for his inevitable at least 3 imps. Oh, gets a 2. But that's still juggles, which is a pretty big deal. He's going to get extra juggle from the Ardent Squire as
Oh,
well. I mean, he's still going to be able to bring him below 10 health this turn with a Power Overwhelming sitting in his hand. So it's looking very grim for Ek0p. I don't even know if he can draw into anything that's going to help him come back.
no, I mean, even a heal ball would just be prolonging the inevitable here. I think he's going to play the True Silver. I think just take the Knife Juggler off the board probably.
Yeah. You can't really clear the aim gank boss because you're taking away 1 damage. You're taking away 2 damage, but you're still spawning an imp, so essentially you're only taking away 1. And that's going to be it. And Ek0p, bold move for bringing the Dragon Paladin with the new Dragon Consort, but it's just a little too slow to be able to deal with decks like Zoo and decks like Face Hunter.
Yeah.